In World War II, some served on the front lines and some served in front of a camera, and some did both. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the U.S. Army Air Force's 1st Motion Picture Unit in the Second World War. At the outset of World War II, the U.S. Army Air Forces had a severe shortage of pilots. Commanding General of the U.S. Army Air Forces, Henry Hap Arnold, believed the way to bridge that gap was to use the silver screen to appeal to men to join the Air Forces. He held a meeting in March of 1942 with the head of Warner Brothers Studio, Jack Warner, about his idea. Now, they laid the groundwork to form a separate film production unit for the Army Air Forces, apart from the Army Signal Corps, who would normally handle that sort of duty. But the main thing that came out of this meeting was that Arnold contracted with Warner to produce a recruitment film, and that film would be called Winning Your Wings.
Looks like I'm back in the movies again, doesn't it? Well, as a matter of fact, I like to do some talking. Don't go away until I get this thing off. Now, it isn't as if it was a chore for me to talk to you because I want to speak on my favorite subject, the Army Air Forces. I can't speak from long experience. I've only been in the service a year, but I've learned a lot about what the Air Forces have to offer. That's what I want to talk to you about.
The film was directed by John Huston, hot off the success of The Maltese Falcon. Writing and some directorial duties were handled by Warner Brothers staff screenwriter Owen Crump. The star of the film was none other than Jimmy Stewart, who by this point was a star actor known for his Academy Award-nominated role in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington in 1939, an Academy Award-winning role in The Philadelphia Story in 1940. Stewart was already in the USAAF at this point. Winning Your Wings would be the only film Stewart would star in during the war years. He was determined not to be relegated to behind-the-lines service due to his celebrity. He would spend over a year stateside training new pilots at Kirtland Army Airfield in Albuquerque, New Mexico. After numerous requests to be sent into the fight were denied, Stewart was finally granted a combat role in November 1943. He was promoted to captain and placed in command of the 703rd Bomb Squadron of the 445th Bombardment Group stationed in England. He would fly 20 missions at the controls of a B-24 Liberator bomber. By the end of the war in Europe, he was the Chief of Staff of the 2nd Combat Wing of the 2nd Air Division of the 8th Air Force, held the rank of Colonel, was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the French Croix de Guerre with Palm, and the Air Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Bottom line, he was the real deal in the pilot seat. After the war, his first movie back was the Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. While continuing his successful movie career, he remained in the Air Force Reserve. He would train on and fly the B-47 Stratojet and the B-52 Stratofortress, aka Buff, or if you, like me, are a follower of habitual line crosser, Grandpa Buff. He would be promoted to Brigadier General in 1959 and during the Vietnam War would fly as a non-duty observer on board a B-52 during Operation Arclight in 1966. He would retire at the mandatory age of 60 on May 31, 1968, as the highest-ranking actor in American military history. Another famous actor who served in combat, but also made films supporting the war effort, was Clark Gable. By the time the U.S. became involved in the war, Gable was a well-established Hollywood leading man. He had appeared in dozens of films, most notably his Academy Award-winning performance in 1934's It Happened One Night, and his iconic role as Rhett Butler in the classic Gone with the Wind. Following the passing of his wife, actress Carol Lombard, in a plane crash on January 16, 1942, Gable was beyond heartbroken. He fulfilled his responsibilities and filmed the movie Somewhere I'll Find You with Lana Turner, but it was obvious to those around him that he was emotionally and physically devastated, as he had lost about 20 pounds since the tragedy. Shortly after the film wrapped, Gable enlisted in the Army Air Force. He wanted to get into the fight as an aerial gunner. MGM Studios, who he was under contract to, wanted him to make films and stay out of harm's way. Finally, the studio relented and Gable was off to training, first to Officer Candidate School and then Aerial Gunnery School. It was during this time General Arnold gave him his mission. He would make a film, later named Combat America, about aerial gunners, hoping to recruit more of them to the service. Gable had gotten his wish. He went into the fight with the 351st Bomb Group flying in B-17 Flying Fortress bombers over German-occupied Europe. To express his seriousness about it, it is said that he told others, "I'm going up there, and I don't care if I come back." The death of his beloved wife Carol still affected him deeply. He flew 5 missions gathering film, and his crew also filmed ground activities for the movie at this time. These missions were the real deal, so much so that during one mission, a shell came through the floor of the B-17 Gable was in, cut off the heel of his boot, and exited a mere foot from his head. Also, it can't be verified, but rumor has it that Gable, hungry for action, pulled some strings and officially flew more than just those 5 missions. With their footage filmed, Gable and the crew returned stateside to edit and produce the film. After his time making Combat America, he would be awarded the Air Medal and Distinguished Flying Cross, achieving the rank of Major. He thought new orders may come, but when they didn't, he requested and was given his discharge in June of 1944. The men who made Winning Your Wings and other early Air Force films at Warner Brothers would form the foundation of the unit that Hap Arnold and Jack Warner planned back in March of 1942. On July 1st, 1942, the 1st Motion Picture Unit, FMPU, also known as the 18th Base Unit, would be activated. The unit would first operate out of Warner Brothers Studios where the earlier films had been produced. The FMPU would briefly relocate to the defunct Vitagraph Studios that Warner Brothers owned in Los Angeles. When Vitagraph didn't meet their needs, they moved to the recently dormant Hal Roach Studios in Culver City, California on the 1st of October, 1942. The men would nickname the place Fort Roach. Side story here, the men of the FMPU would actually march the roughly dozen or so miles from Vitagraph Studios to Hal Roach Studios on their moving day of October 1st of 42. Must have been a little strange seeing a bunch of actors and Hollywood types in uniform marching through the streets of Los Angeles. But that is what happened. Back to the story. Jack Warner was tabbed to head the unit and commissioned to lieutenant colonel. Later, when Jack Warner returned to civilian life, famous stunt and film pilot Paul Mantz was promoted to lieutenant colonel and took over command of the unit. Owen Crump, commissioned to captain, was the executive officer and is believed to have taken over command when Mantz was discharged in 1944, though this is not official, but he did achieve the rank of lieutenant colonel. The personnel officer for the unit would be Second Lieutenant Ronald Reagan. Later, he would work up to being the adjutant for the unit with the rank of captain. Coming out of college, Reagan first became a radio broadcaster. He was with WHO Radio in Des Moines, Iowa, broadcasting Chicago Cubs games when a spring training trip to California in 1936 gave him the opportunity to screen test for Warner Brothers. The test was successful, and Reagan signed a 7-year contract with them to become a film actor. During this time, Reagan was already taking Army extension courses. After completion of over a dozen of these courses, he would enlist in the Army Enlisted Reserve as a private with the 322nd Cavalry out of Des Moines, Iowa. Upon his move to California to work for Warner Brothers, he was appointed second lieutenant in the Officer Reserve Corps of the Cavalry and assigned to the 323rd Cavalry in Los Angeles. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor happens on December 7, 1941, and Ronald is called up for active duty on April 19, 1942. Poor eyesight would exclude him from overseas service, and he was assigned to be a liaison officer at the San Francisco port of embarkation at Fort Mason. In May of 42, Reagan received a request from the Army Air Force to transfer to their public relations unit. As part of the FMPU, Reagan starred in and narrated many training and morale films along with his administrative duties. One of those training films was called Rear Gunner, starring aside an actor I'll talk about later. Reagan would be with the unit until war's end, minus a brief stint on the East Coast to work on a war bond drive. Post-war, Reagan would return to civilian life and show business, but would become increasingly politically active into the 1950s and 60s. His first run for office would be for the governor of California in 1966. He won with 57% of the vote and was re-elected in 1970, but by a slimmer margin. He ran against then-President Gerald Ford for the 1976 Republican presidential nomination. Heading into the nominating convention, the race was too close to call, though Ford would narrowly defeat Reagan on the first ballot. For all of you interested in politics, this is the most recent time the nominee was not known until the convention. Now the nominee is known in advance, and the convention is just a pep rally for the party. Reagan would try again in 1980. This time he won the nomination and in a landslide would defeat incumbent President Jimmy Carter. In a matter of speaking, as president, he returned to the service in his role as commander-in-chief. The FMPU was unique in the military because it operated differently than other units in any branch of the service. Men from the film industry either volunteered or were voluntold, meaning they were drafted. This was done outside of normal draft procedure, as they were drafted directly to the unit. Also, many of them were into middle age and wouldn't be suitable for combat anyway. The men would attend basic training, but it was a much different, lighter, for lack of a better term, and also quite a bit shorter than regular basic training. Military courtesy was also not like the rest of the service. Saluting wasn't mandatory, and the men would refer to each other by their first names as opposed to their rank. That said, security around the studios was very strong as to protect those working there and the secrecy of their work. While so far I've talked about actors, the unit also had top flight men behind the camera. Some of the names you know, and others you may just know their work. Theodore Seuss Geisel, aka Dr. Seuss, was a well-known illustrator and author at the outbreak of World War II. He first gained notoriety for his illustrations in advertising campaigns for companies like Standard Oil, today's ExxonMobil, and Ford Motor Company. In the late 1930s, he would illustrate and author a handful of children's books. With the war in Europe underway, Geisel turned to political cartoons. His cartoons went hard after Hitler and Mussolini. He was highly supportive of President Franklin Roosevelt and went after isolationists and those critical of FDR's handling of the war. I would love to show you some of them here, but this video would get taken down in about 2.2 seconds. Go ahead and search Dr. Seuss World War II, and you'll see he went really hard. Once the U.S. entered the war, Geisel would first illustrate posters for the Treasury Department and War Production Board. He would then receive a commission as a captain in the USAAF to be the commander of animation for the FMPU. Among the many projects he had a part in was the Private Snafu series. Private Snafu was a series of instructional cartoons designed to help enlisted men that didn't have the best of literacy skills learn what they might otherwise have had to have read in a book. This series also had companion comic books, so it was made to be entertaining as well. I may do a piece on this series in the future, but for this video, Dr. Seuss was the lead writer, and the voices were provided by none other than Mel Blanc, known to many as the voice of Bugs Bunny and countless other characters. Bugs even made a few cameos in the series. Blanc did not formally serve in the military, but had a large impact on the training of soldiers through his voice acting.
One man absent, sir.
What's up, Doc?
After the war, Geisel would go back to children's books. He would create characters we all know and love, like the Cat in the Hat, Horton the Elephant, and that Grinch who stole Christmas. Some of the men of the FMPU were on the front end of their career. They weren't famous yet, but they would go on to great success after the war. Richard L. Baer was a budding screenwriter and director before the war. He was the writer behind 1939's Two Gun Troubadour. Starting in 1942, he would direct and write the Joe McDoak's short film series for Warner Brothers. He would be commissioned a captain and was with the unit at its activation on July 1st, 1942. He was one of the key directors in the unit. It's hard to pin down exactly which films he worked on. With the way the unit collaborated, it's safe to say he had a part in many, if not most, of the films the unit produced. After the war, he would continue making the Joe McDoak shorts. He would go on to direct feature-length films, but he really made his mark on the small screen. Among Baer's directing credits on TV are 11 episodes of Maverick in the late 50s, where he is believed to have discovered lead actor James Garner. He also directed 7 episodes of The Twilight Zone in the early 60s, though his main claim to fame on television would be as director behind 166 of the 170 episodes of Green Acres across 5 seasons from 1965 to 1971. Another captain in the FMPU was John Sturgis. Before the war, he was a film editor and cutter at RKO Pictures. Though he had not directed before the war, his time with the unit allowed him to transition into that role. After the war, he would go on to direct mostly westerns. He would receive a Best Director Oscar nomination for his 1955 film Bad Day at Black Rock, starring Spencer Tracy and Robert Ryan. One of the films released after the war that he co-directed was Thunderbolt from 1947. That movie was produced by the FMPU, and the other director was William Wyler. Unlike the others, William Wyler was a highly acclaimed director before the war broke out. His directing career began in the silent film era of the mid-1920s. He would successfully transition to sound films, with his first talkie being a western called Hell's Heroes in 1929. Moving on into the 1930s, Wyler would make numerous highly regarded films. He worked with many of the superstars of the day: Betty Davis, Walter Huston, father of John Huston, who directed Winning Your Wings, and Laurence Olivier, just to name a few. He would be nominated for 5 Best Directing Oscars before joining the FMPU, winning for 1942's Mrs. Miniver. Wyler was commissioned into the unit as a major in September of 1942. He was part of making one of the most highly regarded films to come out of the FMPU, The Memphis Belle, released in 1944. Like Clark Gable and his crew did for Combat America, Wyler and his production team filmed in the skies over German-occupied Europe. Flying aboard the Memphis Belle and other B-17s with names like Jersey Bounce, Hell's Angels, and Bad Penny, they recorded real-life footage of the bombing campaigns of 1943 over France and Belgium. The film was made to be a morale booster on the home front and celebrate the completion of the Memphis Belle's 25 missions. Reaching this milestone meant the aircraft and crew would return home for a PR tour and to help sell war bonds. Wyler and the filmmakers were in harm's way every time they took to the skies. One of the cinematographers, First Lieutenant Harold J. Tannenbaum, was lost when a bomber he was filming in was shot down. While it was not while he was working on the Memphis Belle project, Wyler himself was injured while in the USAAF. During the filming of Thunderbolt, he was exposed to such extremely loud noises that he passed out, and when he came to, he had lost hearing in one ear. He would continue to serve in the unit through the end of the war and had achieved the rank of lieutenant colonel. Returning to Hollywood, Wyler continued to be a highly successful director, earning 2 more Best Director Oscars for 1946's Best Years of Our Lives and 1959's Ben-Hur. Again, he would work with the cream of the Hollywood crop, like Oscar winners Charlton Heston, Olivia de Havilland, and Audrey Hepburn. So far, everyone I have spoken about held officer rank, but obviously there were enlisted men in the FMPU as well. One of those was Private First Class DeForest Kelley. He joined the unit in March of 1943 and served through the end of the war until January 1946. It was while filming a U.S. Navy training film that he was discovered by a Paramount Pictures scout, and his acting career was born. Kelley is best known for his role of Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy in the original Star Trek television series from the late 60s and the subsequent films. He also made a cameo appearance in the first episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint, in 1987. Now, while some men in the unit were at the front end of the career, other actors put their career on hold to make films for the war effort. Van Heflin was fresh off a Best Supporting Actor Oscar from the 1942 Academy Awards for the film Johnny Eager when he enlisted in the U.S. Army. Initially, he was assigned to a field artillery unit, but was injured during training. After he recovered, he was assigned to be a combat cameraman before being transferred to the FMPU. He would appear in 4 films for the unit, including Land and Live in the Jungle and Land and Live in the Desert. After the war, he would continue a successful career in film and later on television. One of those post-war film roles was the British Academy Film Award nominated role in the western Shane, alongside fellow FMPU member Alan Ladd. Having just started to gain fame before the war, Alan Ladd spent a brief period of time in the Army Air Corps. Initially, he was disqualified for service, being classified 4F due to stomach issues. Despite that, he enlisted in January of 1943. He was posted to the Walla Walla Army Air Base in Washington State, but would narrate and star in a handful of films for the unit. He fell ill in October of 43 and was given an honorable medical discharge on the 28th of that month. Returning to Hollywood after his discharge, he was able to continue a successful career. Besides Shane, which I mentioned a moment ago, he also played the lead role of Jay Gatsby in the 1949 version of The Great Gatsby. Another actor whose career was gaining steam when the U.S. entered World War II was William Holden. Breaking through in 1939's Golden Boy, he would be in about a dozen feature films before enlisting in the U.S. Army Air Forces in April 1942. After completing OCS with intention of being a pilot, he was commissioned as second lieutenant. Holden was soon after transferred to the FMPU. He would not only star in, but also write and narrate films for the unit. During this time, his skills would also be used to support public relations efforts by the USAAF. Holden would serve past the end of the war, being discharged in January 1946. Returning to Hollywood, his career continued to grow. In 1953, he would win a Best Actor Oscar for his role in Stalag 17. Later on in 1974, he would win an Emmy for his part in the Blue Knight miniseries on NBC television. And finally, for this video at least, Burgess Meredith. He, like so many others, put his career on hold to enlist in the USAAF in 1942. Meredith got his start on the Broadway stage in the mid-1930s. He would successfully transition to films, which was difficult for many Broadway stars. He would make numerous films for the FMPU, including the film Rear Gunner I mentioned earlier with Ronald Reagan. In late 1944, he was released from service to portray famous war journalist Ernie Pyle in the acclaimed film The Story of G.I. Joe. After the war, Meredith, like the others, continued a very successful career on film, the stage, and television. Many will know him as Mickey Goldmill, the wisecracking yet motivational trainer Rocky Balboa in the Rocky movie series, while others may also know him as the Penguin in the 1960s Batman TV series and that one movie from the same time. Men and women from all over the country and all walks of life put their talents to use to serve the country during World War II. Today's episode talked about the men who served on the silver screen to help recruit and train those in the military and also motivate and educate those on the home front. Some may say the men dodged service by being in the FMPU and not in the line of fire, but did they really? If you look at what the unit was able to produce and the fact that most of the men were outside of combat age range anyway, you'll notice that their service in the FMPU was invaluable to the war effort. Be sure to like and subscribe. I thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.